of my mouth, and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. I wonder if any of you are up to date with the news about the Bayeux tapestry. You remember that nice Monsieur Macron offered to lend it to us for a while. Then it turned out that it needed some repairs first, and it was likely to be delayed. But then someone suggested the repairs could be done in England. And even then, that nice Mr. Sunak might be able to find some money for it. That was the latest I'd heard myself. It's got something going for it. If we repaired it in England, it would give us a chance to make a few tweaks to the story. Not apparently that you need to change the tapestry to do that. The one certain fact we thought we all knew, that King Harold died with an arrow in his eye, well, that turns out to be a myth, so I gather. It's someone else. Harold crept away and opened a shop somewhere, lived to a ripe old age, running a post office and dreaming of the glory days. Well, the question is, would we want to change the result of the Battle of Hastings? Were the victors villains or heroes? Which side would you cheer for? And who won it anyway? The answer to that, as Chow Enlai said when he was asked about the French Revolution, may be it's too early to tell. Too early? Or perhaps too late. There may be a few families around, perhaps even some of you, who can trace your ancestry right back to 1066 and know which side your ancestors fought on. Myself, I'm neutral. I suspect my forebears in those days were salting cod in Scotland or digging wells in Cornwall. So they'll have watched on as the Normans conquered the English. But was it that way round? For a few centuries, yes, the kings and their courtiers spoke French and followed French customs. But by the time we reach Henry V and cheer him on at Agincourt, well, do we want to say Henry V wasn't really English? The Yorks and the Lancastrians, were they aliens in our green and pleasant land? Take the language. English has many roots. The two strongest roots are Germanic on the one hand and French and Latin on the other. The English had words like sparkling and dazzling, delay and mud, whereas the Normans were more into scintillation, coruscating, prevarication and sediment. Extra syllables for each word, meaning you either had to speak faster to get things said or leave half of it out. The theme of today's readings, the one for which all the clergy in this country were preparing sermons until everything changed on Friday, the theme of the first Sunday after Easter is the Exodus. After the Passover, the Israelites who were slaves in Egypt fled the country, were able by a miracle to cross the Red Sea, and after very long wanderings in the wilderness, they were led by Moses into the Promised Land. 1,000 years passed, the same kind of distance as between us and 1066. Moses was long forgotten. The comparatively few Israelites had interbred with the other inhabitants of the land. Some of them even gone off to found another kingdom. And then, in about 600 BC, they were taken into exile in Babylon. And suddenly, the old story was dug up, polished off, pressed into use. They could, to be honest, have easily decided to present themselves as Canaanites or Palestinians. That would have been equally true. It's as if all of us were suddenly to discover we were all really Welsh, Scottish, Anglo-Saxon, or Norman French, Maori or Narragansett, depending on which would help get us out of a hole. It's called retribalization. switching your identity into a new tribe, something better suited to the present. The Israelites in Babylon retribalized as the people who'd come out of Egypt, though very possibly only a few of them did. But they retribalized as people who'd returned from exile, and so they were able to tell each other if they escaped captivity 1,000 years ago, they could do it all over again. It would be pitching it a bit high to say that the Duke of Edinburgh and I were bosom friends. But we did have our moments. I met him first when I was working in Southwark Cathedral. The chapter lined up to greet him and the Queen on the night of the millennium. And when he got to me, he asked, "So what's your role in this establishment then?" Normally, when you're asked a question by royalty, your mind goes completely blank. But on this occasion, I was given an inspiration and I replied, "I'm the person who's paid to sing, 'Oh Lord, save the Queen.'" "I imagine you can just about manage that," he replied, and moved on. I got off lightly. There are many examples of what he called his dontopedology, opening your mouth and putting your foot in it. He did it to break the ice and show that he had a sense of humour, but also that he wasn't someone you should try being too matey with. As we've all been reminded in the last few days, he was a born leader of men, a Greek prince who would have loved to be able to continue his career in the Navy. He's rightly admired for his willingness permanently to play second fiddle to the Queen. But more importantly, he's admired for his astonishing and unswerving sense of duty. That, you can be sure, is what's being said in all the pulpits in the Commonwealth this morning. Just as much as the Queen, he was a symbol of continuity from the time of Britain's greatest danger right up until the present day. He was the longest living and most successful of any of the consorts of monarchs in British history. On him has rested the stability, popular acceptance and common sense of the House of Windsor Mountbatten for almost 3/4 of a century. He'll be mourned and missed by the entire nation. But that wasn't how he began. You could suggest that Prince Philip retribalized. Certainly he gave the impression of being quintessentially English. It was difficult to imagine he'd ever been anything else. Do you know what I've just realised? I've been away for a week and there's something I've neglected to do. Excuse me. I know there are those of you who will ring me up and tell me about that. There you are. Sorry. I was talking about Prince Philip and whether he retribalized. In the early 90s, the Prime Minister of Canada got a taste of Prince Philip's humour during an official meeting when the politician told him his French was very good for an Englishman. Philip shot straight back, "I'm not an Englishman, and I was speaking French before you were born." Our monarchy has ways and customs of its own. It's not local or insular. It transcends national characteristics, as you'd expect, looking at its very diverse history. The kings and queens of Europe shared a great deal. And for most of these, the big ideal they shared was the idea of monarchy as having been ordained by God. It might have an English, French, German or Greek flavour, but at its heart was the notion of being ordained by God for the role, being shepherd of one's people, serving them, responsible for their security and well-being, and accountable to the Almighty for carrying out the monarch's duty. This was the world Philip Battenberg had been born into, and if sometimes he felt more like an amoeba than a prince, having to change his name and identity as the times changed around him, no one can question the authenticity and integrity of his life and the manner in which he lived it. All of us retribalize over time. There's something in it. There's something of it in all of us. Take language, for instance. Most of us at school would have believed our English vocabulary was entirely integrated. We'd have thought the way we talked was part of who we are. Norman or Anglo-Saxon, integrated. We knew all our long words. We brought them out in our writing at school, and we got ticks and stars from our teachers for being able to spell scintillating and coruscation. We could use long words and mix in the shorter words if we wanted to. But it's changing. It's been changing for years. We're becoming more concise, using shorter words, exchanging the elegant multisyllabic expressions for blunter speech. The language that came from the Norman strand in our history is being filtered out. Who knew that it had somehow kept its own flavour and colour, that it was still there just waiting to float away and take half the syllables of each sentence along with it? That's not, I assure you, that's not the message I was planning to give this morning. I strayed from my theme, which was going to be the Exodus and exile, and what that means for us today. But exile and Exodus are next week's theme too. Same time, same place.